Hey everyone, my name is Foteini, and I'm going to present our work on exploring learning rate scaling rules for distributed ML training over transient resources. So as we have heard at the keynote as well, nowadays machine learning models are trained in large clusters of high-end and expensive accelerators such as GPUs and TPUs for many hours or even days. And most common distributed ML frameworks today assume a static all or nothing resource allocation of the requested resources. That means that all of the resources need to be available before a job can get started, and they should be there throughout the whole lifetime of the job. This can lead to long queuing times while the job is waiting to get started, and also periods of underutilization when the reserved resource is waiting for all the other to become available. And of course, as you all know, machine learning training experiences very high costs, and according to recent studies, training even million computer language models takes thousands of US dollars, and we know we have billions or even trillions of parameters in a model, and thus the cost is much higher. And the solution to this problem is by employing elastic training. And elasticity in training refers to the ability of a job to train over a dynamic set of possibly transient resources. And this can solve the problems that I mentioned. First of all, because jobs can get scheduled as soon as some of these the requested resources become available, thus reducing the job queuing time and increasing the overall cluster resource utilization. And a very important impact of this of the elastic training is that users can employ it and use spot virtual machines in order to reduce cost in their training workloads. And what are spot virtual machines? Are basically machines that are offered by many cloud providers at 60 to 90% cheaper than on demand, and thus they can be used to achieve very high cost savings. So elasticity allows us to train over this pool of kind of transient resources, and we can find transient resources not only in the cloud with the form of spot instances, but also in private data centers. And the common characteristics of these spot instances, of these transient resources, wherever they are, is that their availability varies over time. So here we have an example of the availability traces from accelerators from Google Cloud Platform. So we have TPU cores and A100 GPUs over two different cloud zones. And in both diagrams, with a red line, we plot the number of accelerators that we request from the provider, while with a blue line, we plot the number of available accelerators, which is how many the provider can give to us and how big our cluster is. And in both cases, we see that their availability varies over time, as the name suggests, and also that we have basically periods of preemptions and reclamations, which can be quite sudden and costly. And so the question is what to do upon a preemption, what to do, for example, when we lose a specific amount of accelerators. And imagine we want to train over this, let's say, dynamic environment. What would this look like? So a very typical distributed learning setup is like this. You have a bunch of workers, virtual machines, and there are some GPUs attached to it. Each worker operates, its GPU basically operates on its own local batch size, for example, 8 samples, 8 images, while the global batch size is basically the sum of all the local batch sizes. So what changes here in this kind of environment with transient resources is that we have frequent preemptions. And then so for example, here worker 1 is preempted. And the question here is what to do with the global batch size. There are two options, there are two, let's say, alternatives that people can employ to decide what to do with the global batch size. And the first one is to try to keep it constant. And let basically some other node handle this local batch of the preempted node, and employ techniques such as gradient accumulation in order to maintain the same global batch size. But in practice, as we have seen, by implementing these systems, this can lead to potential stragglers and hardware inefficiencies, hardware underutilization, because first of all, the local batch size may change in order to fit. And also there is some load imbalance in the way that the load is distributed across the available workers. And the much simpler solution is basically to scale the global batch size according to the number of available resources, so that the batch size varies over time. And this is something that is employed by many elastic systems that are available today. And this is the approach that we're focusing on in this work. But when we change the bat size, then there is a question of what to do with the rest hyperparameters. So we know that the bat size is tightly coupled to other hyperparameters such as the learning rate. And in this work, we're focusing on the learning rate because it determines the impact of the optimization step and basically affects how quickly our model learns. And according to many studies, when we scale the bat size, we also have to scale the learning rate with a specific amount. And there are many rules that have been proposed for scaling the learning rate, for example, linear, root, other scale, that basically tell us what this amount of scaling the learning rate is in response to a bat size change. The problem with these rules, however, is that they have been proposed with a static global bat size in mind and have been evaluated in cases where the global bat size is static. But we have seen that in elastic training, the bat size can change frequently and drastically. So the questions that come up here is, do these rules apply in these dynamic environments, and which rule to choose when training in such an environment? And this is the focus of this work. We evaluate how well the proposed learning rate scaling rules perform in such dynamic environments. So in order to do so, we built a framework that emulates elastic stochastic gradient descent over transient resources. So you can see an overview of the system in the figure. So the user will specify a global bat size trace, a local bat size, a model, and the learning rate scaling rule. And our framework, which is basically a wrapper around some PyTorch components, such as the data loader and optimizer, will replace the bat size trace and do the training by scaling the learning rate according to the given rule. So our framework also assumes that no data samples are lost when a preemption is happening, for example, and also makes sure that each sample is seen exactly once per epoch. Our framework is open source. It's implemented on top of PyTorch XLA. It runs on TPUs, and please feel free to use it and plug in your learning rate rule and experiment with your cases. In our evaluation, in our study, we experimented with various bat size traces, models, and learning rate rules. For bat size traces, we want them to be realistic, so that's why we used spot traces from Google Cloud Platform, like the one that I have shown before, and we converted them to global bat size over epochs, taking into account some characteristics of the training. We evaluated models from vision and object detection tasks. I'm going to talk about vision models here due to time constraints, but you can check out the paper for more details. And the scaling rules that we evaluated are linear, square root, and other scale due to their wide applicability. So here are the traces that we evaluated for the vision models, and again, this corresponds to accelerator traces from Google Cloud Platform. And here you can see the results of our analysis for ResNet 50 and VGT16 on ImageNet. So let's start with ResNet 50. So we have three cases here. The static one refers to training over a kind of on-demand virtual machine. So we have the same number of resources and the same bat size throughout the lifetime of the job, while trace 1 and trace 2 are basically the trace that I've shown before. So we evaluated three learning rate rules in ResNet 50, and we see that the linear rule and other scale perform quite the same, with other scale having performing a bit better. We see that when we introduce elasticity with the traces, we don't see any significant variation in the end accuracy. So other scale is the best rule here. While in the VGT case, we see actually a kind of inverse result. We see that the root scaling rule outperforms all others. And again, when we introduce elasticity, we don't see a drop in accuracy, which was surprising for us. So the root is the best scaling rule here. What we see from our experiment, and you can also see the paper for more results, is that the best learning rate rule is basically model dependent. But when you have the appropriate rule, the model quality is not significantly affected from elasticity, for example, introducing the bat size variation with the traces. And we acknowledge, of course, that this analysis should be extended to more domains, for example, NLP models and learning rate rules, for example, RS, LAMB, in order to understand what's happening, better understand what's happening in this space. So in order to conclude, the problem that we presented today is that the distributed ML training can suffer from long queuing times and sometimes underutilization of reserved resources and very high costs. Elastic training can help alleviating these problems by allowing us to train over a pool of transient resources, but the availability of transient resources can change over time, including some changes in the global batch size as well. And then the question comes on what to do with the rest hyperparameters such as the learning rate. And there have been many rules to have been proposed for scaling the learning rate with response to the batch size. So what we did is to create a framework in order to evaluate how well these rules perform in the context of transient elastic training. Our framework is open source. And what we have seen is that the best learning rate rule is, of course, model dependent, but when the user picks the best learning rate rule, elasticity does not significantly affect the end-to-end, let's say, validation accuracy or validation metric of our models. Thank you very much.